So we're very excited to have everyone in this second keynote where we're going to cover the state of the project. We're going to be walking you to what is new, what is happening, and what is coming next for each of the components of the project and its technology. So with this, I would love to pass it on to Max, who's going to kick us off.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Matthias, and thanks for kicking this off, Chris. I have the honor to give you a brief overview of the project's architecture. So the project being, of course, Apache Beam. So as you might know already from using Beam or from reading the website, you know that there are several SDKs in Beam, Java SDK, Python SDK, Go SDK, for instance. And with these SDKs, you write pipelines, which then can be are translated by runners and can be run on the execution engine of your choice, Dataflow, Flink, Spark, and others. So I want to give you a little bit of a history about this process. It wasn't always the case that we had this freedom to use several languages. So in the early Beam days, we had just Java actually as the only supported SDK, and everything was pretty much tied to it. So we had the execution libraries, which helped to with the runner with the execution of the pipeline. But these are also, of course, in Java, and everything was kind of very tightly coupled with Java. So what we did there was we really had an easy way to deploy also programs. So I call this the classic architecture, where you have the SDK in Java and the runner, and you compose your pipeline, which then gets submitted to Flink or any other runner, of course, just using Flink as an example here. And then you run your Beam pipeline. But as we moved or progressed and wanted to also support other languages, we realized that this kind of gets complicated because suddenly we have all these different languages and execution layers for Python and Java. And we didn't go that route because we were smarter than that. So what we did is we introduced an abstraction for the pipeline called the Runner API, which is in protobuf. It doesn't really matter, but the important part is that protobuf is available in almost all languages. So all languages can compose and understand this abstraction. And then we also needed another layer for the execution part, which we call the Fun API. And this is necessary because we need to deal with sending data to external process which runs Python or Java, and we need a sort of standardized interface for that. Otherwise, we have to reinvent the wheel for every language, which we didn't want to do. So again, this is just an overview, but in terms of the transforms, which you might already be familiar with, like, for example, Pardo or group by key, it didn't change like too drastically. So we still have the same transforms, but they're now exposed to the runner a little bit differently. So we have this executable stage here, and I will explain to you what exactly that means. So when you have So this is the kind of overview of what happens when you run your Beam job. You have the SDK, you submit your job to the Beam job service. So this is different again from the classic way where you would submit it directly to the runner or to the execution engine. And the runner then submits this to the execution engine. Again, Flink, it could be Dataflow. And then you have these executable stages which communicate over the Fun API with the SDK Harness. And the SDK Harness is just basically your language, the abstraction you use to run your language-dependent code. So with that being said, what is the SDK Harness actually? So it is actually, by default, a Docker container, which is based on an image that we provide, but you can also provide your own if you want to do any modifications, but it's not necessary. But it can also be a dedicated process that gets spun up on the same node. It can also be managed in a worker pool, or it can run embedded, but that of course only works if if you use basically if the SDK and the runner share the same language, which usually is Java. Most runners are written in Java. And you have also special loopback environment for testing, or for developing, which makes it really easy to, don't have any dependencies like Docker, which, it's useful for development. Not going to go over the details of how exactly this Fun API works, because that is covered by other talks later today, actually. And with that, I want to just quickly mention, because it comes up, the cost of doing this. So we have this optimization built in called Pipeline Fusion, where we will actually combine multiple transforms inside the same executable stage. So because they share the same input and they can just be processed together, so we don't have to bring up a bunch of containers, one for each user function, but we actually combine as many as we want. This is called Fusion. So if we look now at the complete picture, and again, this is just an overview, but actually what is really cool about being able to run different SDK code, execute different languages, is that you compose your pipeline, for instance, in the Python SDK. And again, you submit it to the job service, you have it running, you have your Python containers with multiple transforms running, which is this Python SDK Harness part here in the bottom left corner. But then you're really not limited, because we have this abstraction. You're not limited to just running one language, but you can actually, during pipeline creation, connect to an expansion service, which gives you the ability to resolve Java transforms. So for instance, you want to use the Kafka consumer, which is really mature and has been developed for years, in a Python pipeline. Writing it in Python would be very costly, so we have Kafka embedded as an external transform, which basically during runtime, just as you can see here at the bottom, just spins up a Java SDK harness, which then runs the Kafka transform. So that's a really exciting feature that this language portability gives you in Beam. I just wanted to point that out to you. I hope you got somewhat of an idea how the architecture works. And with that, I want to pass it on to Chris, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Max. So after the overview of the different components of the project, we wanted to talk to you first about the first efforts that we have been doing to make Beam easier for users and contributors. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is new in this area? So first of all, we decided to really invest in this, making Beam easy for users and contributors in 5 areas. One is by the creation of the interactive runner, which basically has provided the functionality of running any Beam pipeline code using either Jupyter or Google Cloud AI notebooks. What is happening right now is that we are extending these functionalities into these 2 notebooks as well, and we will continue to improve the functionalities that you can do using this interactive runner. With this, we hope that people like data scientists can also run Beam pipelines and run Beam code. The second part is Beam patterns. Beam patterns have the objective of helping anyone get up and running with Beam really easy, and it's basically snippets of code that solve use cases. In this case, what we have, what we're working on is to have solutions for specific use cases around retail and the Internet of Things. So you don't need to spin up like a Beam pipeline from scratch. You can just use a Beam pattern and solve for these use cases. In the future, we will continue to add more use cases and more more Beam patterns for this. The third part of making Beam more easy to use for users is the machine learning transforms. So what are new is that the transforms that are new is the machine learning transforms that we have for image, video, data loss prevention, and natural language processing. We are continuing to work in maturing these transforms as well as incrementing the available transforms that we have in the project. The fourth part is project infrastructure. So as I mentioned, making Beam easy, it's also for contributors. So we have done things like switching to the new Jenkins, GitHub Actions instead of Travis CI for continuous integration. And we are working in adding more or better test and automation for the project. With this, we hope to remove a lot of the overhead of contributing to the project and incentivize more people to do so. And the last point is website migration to Hugo and Doxy that already was completed. The big motivation to do this is to enable localization. With this, we hope that in the upcoming months, we motivate the community to help us do the translation into the most popular languages, such as English, Chinese, etc. And at the same time, right now, we are going at a user interface redesign for the website in which we hope to refresh some of the content as well as add pages that can help the community stay engaged and informed. With this, we are going to now talk about what is new in the Beam model. So the Beam model has, as Max was mentioning, has three main components. So the portable pipeline execution, the cross-language pipelines, and we also want to cover that we have been developing more powerful and user-friendly APIs. So what is new? As Max mentioned in the introduction to the architecture, the Beam model continued to evolve to finally allow any portable runner to execute any portable SDK using Docker containers. So this is part of the portable pipeline execution piece. As now moving to the other side, the cross-language pipelines now allow any pipeline to be run in any SDK using any runner. So we have matured that model in the two component side. In terms of the more powerful and user-friendly APIs, we recently launched schemas that allow for data structures to be portable. So it doesn't matter which SDK you use to define them, you can just grab them and use them in any SDK. So for what is happening right now, in the portable pipeline execution, we're adding support for legacy sources. So this is something that we have heard our community request for many times. So now we have finally start to work in supporting this piece. In terms of cross-language pipelines, we continue to mature the support for Go, which is another SDK that we want to add to the cross-language pipelines. And we have also worked into develop more powerful APIs, specifically splittable DoFun, which is actually an API that lets you modify a Beam pipeline when it's running to either distribute work while it's running, or also to scale down and scale up resources. So for what is next, overall, we're going to be focusing on extending and closing the gaps between portable pipelines, as well as continue to make all the functionalities of cross-language, the runner executions to be at par, one from the other. And we will continue to make the Beam model more extensible. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ismael, who's going to start talking about what's happening with the SDKs.
Okay. Hi. SDKs is what we use to materialize the Beam model. This is what we use to program. So basically, what we look here are two things in general. One, to integrate well with language and ecosystem where this SDK is run. For example, in Python, in the last year, we got some of the improvements of the language into Beam. Now Beam supports type hints that are allows us to better define data. And the Python records that are called data classes. So this is one area. Of course, Python users want to have, for example, familiar APIs. So we are working in supporting Pandas data frame like API. In the Java side, of course, we want to support Java 11. I know it can seem a little bit late to talk about Java 11 at this point because it's been out for a while. But actually, we need the whole big data ecosystem to support Java 11 to be there. So it's a catch-up that all of the projects have done until this year. Actually, all of them got there, Flink, Spark, etc. So okay, so that's for the language integration area. The second point is the Beam model. How can we make the Beam model easier to use for our programmers? So how can we do it? Well, integrating better abstractions. So one of those, well, was barely mentioned before, is schemas. Schemas allows us to express some structure in our data, and with this we can have simpler to write APIs. So we have a new family of transforms that is based on schemas that are easier to write, and also uh, we have the DoFun APIs were a little bit verbose. We have worked a lot on improvements on this. So this is the second big area of improvement. Um, this is mostly all for the what's been done. What we expect to do next is to include the missing parts of the Beam model, like retractions, for example, to come to play in the game. Well, that's all for SDKs. That's how we write programs and transforms. But now, another important area is how we get data in and out of these pipelines. And this is what connectors do. And in Beam, we call these IO connectors. And in connectors, we have basically, well, different needs. No, of course, we have the need of the new things, the new data warehouse that we have to support, and we include these new connectors every year. We have support for Snowflake now. We have also support for different clouds, like for example, you need a file system and you're running Beam on Azure. Well, now you have support for blob storage file system. Or if you have some specific APIs that run on Google also, well, now we have these specific connectors also for those, like the Google Healthcare connector that is like a kind of an IO, let's say. Also, well, we have support for Amazon Web Services and their new SDK 2. This is also ongoing work. And we have support now for file SQL. I mean, we can query SQL with SQL file systems and with data in Avro or Parquet format. And a big improvement in this area is that we have SQL predicate pushdown, so queries will be faster now. Second big area on connectors is the new APIs. So Greece barely mentioned splittable DoFun. The idea of splittable DoFun is that we can have more dynamic and reusable IO connectors that can compose in different steps of the pipelines. And a first case of use of this comes with the support of Kafka now as a splittable DoFun. And this allows to solve us a problem that was requested for a long time, that was to discover dynamically partitions on Kafka. Also, a third area that matches with the world presentation is cross-language support. And as we mentioned, we now can connect connectors written in a different language in another language. This is also a big area of work now on Beam, and we expect to expand this in the next year to support more cross-language connectors like Kinesis or Amazon or Snowflake too. And finally, the last area of progress in IO is SQL and schemas, and with these schemas basically became portable now. So the idea is that we can use schemas in one language and use it also in the other language. This opened the option now to have SQL executed from Python, for example. So this is what's going on with connectors. Now the third and final part is runners. So runners are what allows us to execute all these pipelines that we wrote using the SDKs and the connectors. We run them with the runners. So I'm going to talk about the Spark runner and its latest progress. Basically, during the last year, we merged a new runner called the structured streaming runner. It's a new way to translate the Beam model into Spark that uses the latest APIs and hopefully gets the performance advantages that they bring. The biggest part of work during the year was around the portable runner to make it at par, at least with the other runners. So we have now a Docker image for the runner for the job server. Sorry, we have support for Python, easier deployment in Python, lots of performance and correctness improvements, and we have metrics now. So, and we are testing cross-language pipelines now every day as part of continuous integration. So this is already supported. What's next for the Spark runner? Well, we have ongoing work on support of Spark 3, who was released 2 months ago, and hopefully will be in the next or the next after the next release, but not so late. And also there is ongoing work for streaming in the portable runner. So at this moment, portable runner of Spark is only batch, so that's a new step. And finally, well, the agenda for the next year is to see if we can unify somehow all these runners, so to offer a simpler experience for the end users. Now let's go with the Flink runner.
All right. Thank you, Ismail, for the update on Spark Runner. I'll just give you a quick update on the Flink runner. There's a lot on this slide, and I probably won't be covering everything, but just for reference. So what are the most important things? First of all, we support currently Flink 1.8 to 1.10, and I know that Flink 11 is already out, so that will be supported in the next Beam version, Beam 25 to 25. And generally, we did a lot of work to simplify the way deployment works. So we have now the ability to submit an Uber jar, which doesn't require you to run a Beam job service. And actually, this works automatically if you just use the Flink runner in Python. So that's really convenient. Also, by default, we use the loopback environment in Python to make it really easy to just quickly run your pipeline. And so you have some performance optimization like state caching, which are really neat if you run this on large scale. We also have batch optimizations and checkpointing improvements, and some new features like require stable input for exactly once end-to-end. We are also continuously improving. So we have more plans for improving deployment, for example, on Kubernetes, which could be easier. I mean, there's some solutions out there, but ideally we want to bundle it directly with Beam. Also, we have some regression testing in place now, which is still ongoing development, but that allows us to catch like performance regression early. And then, of course, lots of bug fixes, improved documentation. So the biggest next milestone for Flink would be to fully deprecate the classic runner. So we only run in portable mode. And also to implement dynamic splitting, so we are able to rebalance work that you perform in your Pardot operations. And generally, performance hasn't been a huge issue, but I'm sure we could still do some work here and there. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you. And now I'll hand over again to Chris.
Thank you, Max. So now I'm going to walk you through the state of the Dataflow runner. So in Dataflow runner, the biggest milestone that we have accomplished right now is the Dataflow runner v2, which right now already provides multi-language pipelines in preview for Python streaming, and also provides a more complete feature support for Python. This can bring your pipelines up to two times improved performance. So we are very excited about that. In terms of what's happening now with that Dataflow Runner v2, we are working on a full support for splittable DoFone and also new and improved capabilities for Python streaming. So as we continue to work on that the functionalities and the Python SDK for streaming will come to close the gaps that we have with Java. Other new releases is that the Shuffle service now, we have fully managed Shuffle service for batch jobs. And for the streaming engine, now we support customer managed encrypted keys. So those are also big improvements. And lastly, we have Dataflow SQL, which pretty much lets you run a Beam pipeline code using the BigQuery web UI. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the notebook integrations. And in things that we are working or what's happening right now, we are maturing the CD support, change data capture. Right now, we have launched 2 templates, and we're going to continue to launch more for Dataflow that allows you to sync streams from MySQL, Postgres, and Oracle databases into BigQuery. And lastly, in the things that are coming next, we are bringing Flex templates, which is pretty much a way to let you share any Beam pipeline transform any Beam pipeline into a template that you can share for collaboration with your teams. And as well, we are going to be working on GCP I/O debuggability, bringing read and write counts and latency metrics for PubSub and BigQuery. So with this, I am going to pass it to the next slide, which is to let you know that if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation about what's happening with the project, what's happening with the SDKs and any of the runners, you can send your questions to the user mailing list, which is user@beam.apache.org. Also, we're going to be in the Slack channel through the summit. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them there, and we'll be answering them through the summit. Thank you so much.